Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we're back for another exciting episode of Off the Comma. And this week, I'm really excited because I'm meeting somebody brand new today, like literally meeting for the first time. And this week's episode, or rather this week's guest, is really a testament to the power of networks. As this podcast has grown and as different folks have been on the podcast and been guests, they too have been sharing their stories with others. And one of our previous guests, Brigitte Knight, who was on an earlier episode this year, late last year, she mentioned Stephen to me, and Stephen and I reached out and exchanged some conversation and so forth. And so now Stephen is here to share his story with us. And so I'm very excited to meet you, Stephen, in person, or at least on a screen, and to hear your story, and hopefully this to be the springboard of many more conversations to come. But I'm going to quit rambling and hand it over to you, actually, so that you can do the talking. So Stephen, tell us, how would you like to be known? And then what else would you like for us to know about you?
So I obviously am Stephen, and three kind of adjectives that I would use to describe myself are emotional, intelligent, resilient, and compassionate. Currently, I live in Los Angeles, California, and, I have an interesting career background where I started off in higher education doing like sort of sports and collegiate through like my undergrad, my master's program, got into like more of like the health and wellness, but on the medical side. And then that was when I lived in Ohio. And then I moved out to California after I finished my master's. And I got into like home health, hospital, then biotech. And now I've kind of like scratched the corporate world and am shifting more into more entrepreneurial life in career coaching.
Okay. That's a real kind of span or spectrum too of things. And it kind of just another reinforces the diversity of experiences that a career path can take and
in life too. I think for me, it's always been what's at the top of that next mountain. I've reached the highest that I can go with this one, and I got to the top, and now I see that there's another one to climb. Mm-hmm. So it's like that constant climbing. But for me, it's more like, I call it like migration. It's, once I learn what is here, it's like what grass is greener on the other side, so that I can learn, but then take what I've learned and bring it back to like my family, communities, and kind of be 10 steps ahead of them in terms of knowledge to help inspire them to grow in whatever capacity. One of the things that I remember when I moved to California, I remember it took me a year to decide if I actually wanted to do that. And I just remember thinking after my master's program, like, what's next was my big question that I asked myself. And I moved out to California mainly, one, to test myself to see what I was capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And I moved out there with $500 to my name, nowhere to live, but all I had was a job in my dreams. So within the first week of moving there, I thought that I was going to have to turn around and go back home because I was supposed to start work on that Monday and realized that I had left my passport back in Ohio.
Mm.
And you have to have, for employment verification, you have to have 2 forms of ID. Well, I didn't have those. So I'm like, shoot, I just got out here and I'm going to have to go right back. But luckily enough, I got that overnighted through like UPS, and still frantic about where I was going to live. And sure enough, when I just let my fears subside and just like trust that everything will be taken care of, the end of my first week there, I ended up getting a room for rent, which was a godsend because the guy charged me nothing to move in, like no security deposit, no nothing. And it was like, just get me the first month's rent when you can after you start making a living. So I'm like, what a huge like burden that was lifted off of me that I can actually now, kind of move into this new state to live in without fearing that I'm going to have to go right back where I came from.
What I love about that story, a number of things that you've said, is like sort of the traveler, the explorer in you, right? You didn't use those words, but I kind of see a thread in there. And this kind of reinforcement of something that I experience in my own life, and I hear people talk about all the time on the podcast and with clients and so forth, is like when you're on the right path. I use the word right in air quotes, right, carefully. But when you're on the path that the universe wants you to be on, then things will show up for you, right, when you need them. And if you're not on the path that the universe wants you to be on, things will show up to remind you or point it out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, emotional intelligence was one of those adjectives that I used to describe myself because, you have to be aware of, if I'm on the wrong path and I'm feeling things, resistance, frustration, bitterness, those are key indicators that I'm like, hey, I should stop pushing through this and trying to basically push water up a hill, at that point. Because to your point, if you are on the right path, everything should just be smooth sailing. And, I think a lot of times people get so focused on tomorrow's problem rather than living in today that they try to make life happen instead of letting life happen, if that makes sense.
You speak truth, and yet everybody still kind of has to experience it in their own kind of unique way as well. So many things that you say, and I can tell we're going to have some really powerful conversation here. I'd love to get into your story, and before we do start with your story, one of the things I always ask guests is, as you think about the time ahead, the next 45 minutes or so, and the conversation that we're going to have, what intention would you have for yourself?
Intention. One would be, I think, vulnerability is one big thing. And to share my story authentically and not hold anything back, mainly as a practice for myself. So that, for future relationships or, what have you, vulnerability is obviously the foundation, I think, anyways. But then it also symbolizes true like power within myself, because if you can be vulnerable, then like no one can hold anything over you or control you or what have you. So I think vulnerability overall.
It seems like, and I'll jump in from time to time. I might interject or interrupt, and if I reflect something back that doesn't land quite right, by all means, correct me. Sure. But do I also hear kind of a thread of trust in there?
Oh, 100%. I would say 1,000% actually. And the trust goes with other people, but I also think that it goes with myself more so than other people. Mainly because I think for so long I put other people's needs ahead of my own, especially stemming from childhood, that there's a part of me that doesn't feel like I can trust myself, because I'm like, will I put my needs first, or will I allow others' needs to triumph over mine? So trust is 1,000% on there.
Yeah, it's kind of it's sort of paired up with the vulnerability, right? Like you have to be able to trust that that will bring you the outcome that you're looking for. So I see and honor your intention. My intention for the conversation is obviously, as I always do, to hold space for that conversation, create a container for you to have the safety and the vulnerability that you want. And also that in sharing your story, that it will reach people who need to hear this story, that will hear what you have to share and say that resonates with me, feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and in the best of cases, a little bit more inspired and maybe empowered to do something that they've been wanting to do in their lives.
Yeah.
So,
And before like we move on, like I want to establish like my personal definition of trust.
mhm,
And everyone might have their own, but for me, trust is being okay with not knowing.
mhm,
And I think that if I can embody that simple definition of trust and just whatever is going on in life around me, if I'm okay with not knowing what's going to happen next, then I think I step into myself more and become more in peace and living in the now and really just embracing life for what it is. And in every moment we always have exactly what we need, no more, no less. We'll always survive, and being okay with that.
so that particular theme resonates so hard with me, and like I could open up a whole conversation separate and on its own. I think I will ask the question and let you answer it, however you choose to. But I think in exactly what you said, trust is, as you said, being okay with not knowing and kind of accepting what will come.
Yeah.
The question that always comes to mind, and how exactly do you do that? I don't know if that's going to be in your story already or if that merits its own response, but what does that actually look like for you in a day-to-day moment
Yeah.
to let go of the knowing?
So it's actually very easy for me. And I'm sure you're familiar with human design. So in human design, you have what's called your motivation. And motivation is how you move through life, right? So there's 6 different motivations. There's like fear, guilt, need, innocence, what have you. Mine is innocence, which happens
Mm.
to be a motiveless motivation. So
Mm.
whenever I desire something or have expectations or, you know, want something to happen in my own benefit, that's where I'm on what's called transference. So things will fall apart the moment I have a desire or an attachment to something. Always does. And I forget what age I was, but you're going through school and they ask you to put together like your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan. Those always cause me so much anxiety because I'm like, I don't want to know. I'm not worried about, 5 years from now. I'm just
Hmm.
here. So I think it's easy for me because it's innately who I am, you know, to be unattached, to have zero expectations on how you show up, how that person shows up. I'm not going to expect someone to think the way that I think or do the things that I do the way that I would do them. I think that's why or how, it's easy for me is because I have that innocence motivation, which can sometimes come across to other people as unattached, not unattached, but detached, aloof, what have you. But for me, it's perfect.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say too is like you're, and I'll grossly oversimplify, right? But also, what I think I'm hearing you say is that like I'm incapable of getting too attached because it doesn't work out anyway. So there's like a default in the system of just like letting go is inherently the only way I can kind of navigate.
Right. It's too, I forget when I think it was like one of my resolutions in like 2007, 2008. And it was not to plan anything outside of the current day that I'm in.
Mm.
I'll have friends who are like, what are you doing Saturday night? And I'm like, I don't know. What day is it? Tuesday? Well, get to me on Saturday because right now I'm in Tuesday. So, it can come across to other people as like annoying. They're like, why can't you plan ahead? I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm going to feel on Saturday. I might be excited about hanging out with you today on a Tuesday, but come Saturday, I might feel a different way. So I would rather not break a an engagement and have to cancel on you versus we can go both in knowing that I may hang out with you, I may not. And we're both going to be okay with that.
Yeah. And there's a flip to that too, which is, and I'd rather not force myself to keep an engagement because I committed to it and then suffer through it.
Right. And it's not what's better going to come along. That's never my need to not want to have a solid plan. I just really don't know how I'm going to feel.
It's very different from how I am, but I have a friend who finally helped me understand what it's like on that side. It's not the most common way we're kind of programmed in our society to interact with and be with each other. And yet it's just as valid and it's so misunderstood, right? So,
yeah, and like, I think those are aspects of myself that from a younger age, I would turn off because, everyone wants you to be there for them and they want you to do things the way that they do it. And when you deny yourself your true way of being and operating in life, then, you can end up with a whole bunch of dysfunction later on in life. So now it's going back through and, well, I'll say this, my first 30 years in life were going through and becoming who I thought I wanted to be. And then now I'm in my second 30 years and it's like unbecoming everything that I thought that I wanted to be to become who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. So much that we could continue to explore. Let's jump into your story and see where it takes us. Let me start with the first question. And as with other guests, you and I haven't talked about what you're going to be sharing, so I don't know what you're going to be sharing with us. I'm looking forward to hearing it. So the first question is, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Now. Now, I'm in, kind of this hermit phase in life, if you will. 35, I'll go ahead and say that. So I've gone through kind of like my first 30 years of trial and error and really just seeing what works, what doesn't, do I want to belong over here? Do I want to belong over there? And belong's actually a really interesting thing because in the sense of me wanting to belong here or there, what I ended up doing without realizing it was just fitting in. And then I lost belonging to myself. And I remember one day, I think it was 30 or 31, I woke up and I just remember thinking, I have no idea who I am. And it was this confusing, sad moment that I'm like, I've never felt like that before. And it was weird to all of a sudden, just one day, just now have this feeling. It's like, who am I? So I think that kind of started my journey to rediscover myself and really put people, at bay so I can figure out what and who am I? What makes me happy? What are my likes, dislikes? Do I want to live here or there? So I think now in life is where I'm at in my comma. I'm getting off of that comma, but
so you're kind of in this place. You're saying it's really happening now, and it's this kind of realization of not having a strong sense of current identity, being open to exploring it, discovering it. I'm curious. You said kind of I woke up one day. I don't know if you meant that specifically or metaphorically, but like what was happening in your life at that time where suddenly now here's this realization?
So at that point, I was actually engaged. And I think this is where my story is going to go. And I had and I can feel the chills in my body. So this is where we're going to go.
Okay. Ah.
So I was with my ex for about 5 years, engaged for like 1.5. And, during COVID is really when it started, because working from home, I worked in the biotech industry, and I found myself overcompensating for work. Like that somehow, some way, that I needed to prove my value and that I was worth keeping around for COVID. So I would work a lot and just really wanted to prove my worth, which was red flag number one. I don't have to prove myself to anyone, but I didn't know that then. So after a year, some things went on at my company that there was things shifting, and it was just time to flee the coop. I had got so buried with work that the only way that I knew how to rebalance myself was to literally quit. So I did. It was a bold move with not having anything lined up, but it's like myself was worth more than the headache of what companies, because I'm just a number to them. So at that point, my ex and I won't go into too much into it, but we started to grow apart. And we'll just put it that way. So through all of that, there was so much confusion. And I think that's where a lot of my trust issues now started to resurface from, I guess, childhood. And what had triggered me was this sense of abandonment and betrayal. I remember hearing in my head, I would tell myself this question, which was, if this person can't love me, then who can? And I remember asking myself that maybe 2 different points in my life. One was with my first ex, back in Ohio. And at this point, when I'm asking myself this question, if they can't love me, then who can? I was willing to stay in dysfunction because I'm like, well, this is the best of it, I guess, so I might as well take what I got. But I was limiting myself like so much by doing that. I remember with my ex, there was this one night in particular where there was this argument, and very emotional I was. And I remember running through my house, our house at the time, trying to find my dog so I can go to bed. I'm like running through the house frantic. I'm like, where's my puppy? And so I go and find her, and I pick her up, and I just storm down the hallway to the bedroom, and I pass my ex, who was standing in the atrium, to go to our room. And when I look at him, I see, like, kind of over him is this, what looked like my mother. And like a visual projection or what have you. But at that point, I knew that something was going to surface, because I'm like, why am I seeing my mother in my house right now? This is weird. So that kind of started like my little journey to go back to childhood, which I think for the longest, I kind of told myself that, childhood was, a-okay. It wasn't the greatest, but it wasn't the worst. So, just like anyone, I'm fine. Little did I know, no, you're not fine. So that led me to kind of dive deep and go, okay, well, why am I seeing my mom? So from there, then I began to get like different flashes of like insight, and it would just be random things that would lead me to kind of discover different things about my childhood. So the first, and I don't like throwing out this word because I don't believe in diagnosing anyone, but like narcissism. So my mom, by definition, would be a classic covert narcissist. And what really drove me to that conclusion was, you're gonna laugh, but I remember my mom playing this song, Kanye West, Gold Digger, when that song first came out. And there's a part in it where, uh, he says, 18 years, got you for 18 years. On his 18th birthday, he found out the child wasn't his.
Mm.
And so that clued me into this prompt that I asked my dad when I'm 34 at this point. Did you ever think that one of us, because there's four boys, asked, I said, did you ever think that for whatever reason that one of us kids were not yours? And without hesitation, he's like, yeah, your older brother.
Oh, wow.
So, like, this flash of insight now unlocks this secret that's been like hidden and tried to cover up throughout like my entire childhood. So I'm like, okay, well, why was this secret hidden? And, you know, from a my mom's perspective, she didn't have the greatest childhood, but she lived in the ghetto. And then she sees my dad, who has money, and sees him as like an easy target to kind of like go after. And, my dad told me, he's like, yeah, I had no idea her mom was pregnant. He's like, we weren't even together. One day she just shows up at my door and, baby fully delivered with her bags packed and was like, hey, surprise. And my dad thought about it, but ultimately he did what he thought was best and was like, okay, well, let's go. But that kind of started like the downward, okay, well, I have this secret now, this lie. Now I have to disrupt, destroy, and try and prevent my lie from being uncovered, which really then put, after all of us were born, like my mom put each of us siblings against each other, put us against my dad so that no one's talking. And we're going to keep dysfunction and keep each other mad at each other so that no one talks to each other. And, all just to keep this lie from being uncovered.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
Families, right? And the family dynamic and the things that can come up in families are so fascinating and interesting. And
Yeah.
I hear that, and that had to be really challenging to even have that uncovered in your history, because it kind of rewrites the story a little bit, then, doesn't it?
Right. And I had to literally rewrite my entire story because I'm like, okay, well, if this is a lie, like what else is a lie? Because my reality that I've known up until this point is based on how I grew up and what I thought was truth. And if this isn't truth, then, well, what else is? So
Mm.
it was a hard place to go to because it would then put me in a position where, one, now I have this knowledge that I don't like sitting with it. No one knows but me and my dad at this point. So this is uncomfortable, heavy, deep stuff that now I have to be entrusted with and not, go off and tell the masses. And, so I think that weighed on me for a lot, was just knowing this stuff. And it still does, because, when you think of narcissism and just those traits, it's, what can people provide me? How can I get supply? And when I think of supply, in my mom's case, it's money. How can I get my life paid for and supported? And, if you have someone who grows up in the system like my mom did, she looks at kids as like a cash cow, basically. It's like, okay, well, I got 4 kids, 18 years, child support. There we go. Here's
Mm.
my life provided for, and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But my mom, well, this is where I think the universe really balances things out, because out you can't do bad and think that everything is going to play out in your favor.
The concept of balance, right? Balancing the
Right.
scales. Yeah.
Yeah.
Karma.
Has to be balanced, has to be balanced. And, if you set out to do something to hurt someone or to deceive them, what have you, the universe is already 10 steps ahead of you. And I know this because I did it once. And what I wanted to happen to someone ended up happening to me before it
Mm.
happened to her. And that was the only time I ever messed with that. And I'm like, okay, do not, like, what you put out there will come back and get you.
Yeah.
And, although my mom had full custody of us to start for the first 2, 3 years, at the third or fourth year, my dad took her back to court and ended up getting full custody of us, which then canceled out her child support, which at that point set my mom in this rage, now vengeful, spiteful war path against my dad. That out at that point, she just like, I hate that man. I'm like,
Mm.
you hate the man that you try to like. You don't see that your bad behavior in all of this. So for my whole life, my mom played this victimhood mentality um, persona, and for a good chunk of it, I was sympathetic for her. I felt bad for her. I tried to people please and do what a good mama's boy would do,
Hmm.
which I didn't realize ended up costing me basically my whole identity.
Mm.
Um, and I'll even go a little bit further. So this aside for a moment, I think 34, I was taking a shower one day, and, for a good 10, 11 years, I identified as a gay male. And one day I'm taking a shower, and I kid you not, I hear this faint voice, which was my voice, but it was this thought that I've never thought before, which was, "You're not gay."
Mm.
And when I heard that, I'm like, no, like this can't be true. But it was the only time that I ever heard it. But it made me now start down a new path to try to uncover something. I'm like, well, there has to be something here,
Mhm.
So at least let me explore it. So I traced back to the moment that I decided that I was going to be gay. And, I think growing up, and I think why I attached to emotional intelligence is because I didn't fit the societal norm of what it is supposed to be, quote unquote, to be a boy. I wasn't, into
Mhm.
sports and like what have you. I was very creative and I liked very emotional. It's tuned with my emotions. Like I always like to say that God's the DJ to the soundtrack of my life, and I never know what song he's going to play next. It could be
Mm.
happy and upbeat one minute, or it could be sound and depressive another minute. I just never know. I'm very melancholy. When you aren't like other boys, people project onto you without you realizing it. So before I even knew what gay was, that word was being thrown at me by adults, kids at school, whomever. So when I don't fit in, or where I don't have this sense of belonging, through high school, middle school, what have you, just wanting to set in somewhere, then when I'm in college, I'm like, okay, well, this sounds like an okay kind of group to go with. And I remember praying, uh, and I prayed that if I wasn't gay, that I wanted this girl, this specific girl, to be my girlfriend. And if she wasn't going to be my girlfriend, then that must mean that I was gay. And it was basically like telling God how to do his job at
Hmm.
that point. So I'm like, okay, I can see myself where I made that mental decision that, okay, well, since it didn't plan out the way that I wanted, now this must be my alternative. And the reason, and that actually was one of the first times that I asked myself that question. Well, if this person can't love me, then who can?
Hmm.
So, like, I'm following this question around at three different, very unique stages in my life. And I remember this last time when I asked myself that, my ex can't love me, then who can? And without missing a beat, I hear myself say, me. I've been searching for love outside of myself for I don't know how long, that thinking that other people are going to fulfill me, or when the ultimate love that I was looking for was the love for myself. Um, so being there unconditionally for myself, and when you put your needs again on the back burner and everyone else is before you really don't have a sense of love for yourself. You know, yes, it's good to give from the cup that overfloweth, but if you're constantly giving from your cup and not what overflows, you're in a deficit.
Hmm.
So
I appreciate how you've shared this story in your way, because you've shared a number of different parts of your story, facets of yourself, different timelines and events to kind of bring us to this comma, which was, and they're all connected in terms of how I was feeling about myself, my relationship to love, external love, internal love. I mean, that's just a really powerful way to show how these things can kind of show up and manifest in little ways and in little whispers over time. And then something in our lives kind of brings them, all these different timelines crashing together into a very profound and significant message.
yeah, I was letting other people dictate who I was.
Mm,
And I didn't realize that, but it's like, well, I want this person to be here. I don't want to lose anyone. So let
mhm,
me change who I am. And maybe you'll come around and be, the person that I know that you can be, like people fixer.
mhm.
Um, but really, I was the one that was changing through all of it, thinking that I can change someone to be who I needed them to be, when really in that process, now I've abandoned myself, I betrayed myself, all for someone else.
Well, and I mean, look at this period that you were describing, right? You've quit this job because the job is not meeting your needs and expectations. Your relationship is
Mm.
going into a period. It sounds like very a painful. You didn't say that, but a difficult breakup that is a
Yeah.
reflection of expectations not being met. The then kind of the revelation or the memory of the recollection of the family dynamic, the mother who's not meeting your needs, the family lie, like, and then there you are. And now suddenly I don't know who I am. And I'm in my 30s. And now who am I going to be going into the next part of my life?
Yeah. With my relationship, as painful as that may be or was, I look at that as a learning experience and kind of, here's my lemons. Now I'm going to make lemonade. So
Hmm.
using that experience to now turn around and help people who are going or have gone through those difficult times. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Let me help you
Hmm.
now, because as dark and as painful as it may be when you're going through it, there is a light at the end of it. And I've seen that light, and I know,
Hmm.
how great it can be on the other side, especially when you come back home to yourself. And yet, if I didn't have that relationship experience, I don't think that I would have uncovered anything about my childhood, because that dynamic really opened me up to one, seeing my parents for who they were. You know, for so long I thought that my dad was this type of person, that I allowed my mom to paint the lens of how I was seeing him. And going through that dynamic with my ex, I'm like, okay, now I can see who is in the roles of my parents, me being my dad, my ex being my mom. I'm like, okay, well, I know how this story goes. So I'm
Mm.
literally living out moments in my life that were, I guess, like fragments of my dad's story. And at that point, I didn't talk to my dad for like 5, 6 years. We were like not on a speaking point. And I remember coming to this conclusion that my dad is not who I think that he is, you know, at this like bad guy, this monster that my mom painted him out to be. So on the week of his 56th birthday, at this point, I forgot that it was his birthday, but I ended up
Mm.
calling him and telling him that I finally understood what he was trying to tell me
Mm.
since childhood about my mom, which was she's not the person that you think that she is. And, you know, I was going to cry there for a moment, to
Mm.
be able to bring someone, I guess, liberation, validation, to let them know that you see them and that you know that they're not crazy, even though everyone else was against you for, you know, at that point, 36 years of his life. That was just hell from my mom. Um,
Mm.
to let him know that I understand because I've gone through what you've gone through. And now let's repair this. And, you
Mm.
know, I remember him telling me in that conversation, he's like, "You're not just telling me things that you think that I want to hear, right?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not." I'm like, "I feel like I've just walked in your shoes. And I want to say that I see you, I feel you, I know you, you know." And I think that that gave me a whole different love and appreciation for my dad, which, oddly enough, my dad was the one and only person. Well, I shouldn't say one and only, but he's always shown what unconditional love is and what it should be. You know, I think people have this idea of love, but it's very transactional. It's like, okay, well, I love you, and I'm going to say I love you so many times so that you think that I love you, but then I'm going to pull it away from you when you don't meet my needs, um, which is what was showcased to me from my mom.
Mm.
And I always, through my whole life, matched actions with words with people. That's how I knew if I can trust someone. And my dad, it didn't matter where he was, what I did, what I didn't do, what not. Whenever I needed something, regardless, good or bad, he was
Mhm.
always there to give what he could give, you know. And so his love for me never changed through whatever circumstance, you know. As long as he could give, he would.
Mhm.
And the second time that I experienced unconditional love was through the guy who offered me to live in California, the room for rent, no deposit, no first month's rent. Give it to me when you get money. Like he didn't know me at that point. All I had to do was just be there. And for him to just say, "Yeah, that is unconditional love," without expecting anything in return, you know? It's like I'm giving freely with no agenda, no attachments, not wanting anything in return. And
Yeah. Well, and
yeah,
I'm hearing from you this, like, people modeling for you what love is not, and in very unsensational ways, very everyday ways that aren't exactly what shows up in the movies and in TV, and in these very kind of long and sustained examples. I wanted to, the second question, I feel like you've really already answered the question, but I'll invite you to add to it anything that maybe you want to add. But as you look at this comma that you were sitting on, these different elements of kind of experiencing and questioning what love means to you, and how do you love yourself, and all of these things that were happening at this point. What else would you say that created for you beyond what you've already shared with us?
Being able to, I guess, embody my emotions for the first time. I think, not I think, I know, I know that I have gone through life kind of like detaching from them. And, I'm like split down the middle, 50% analytical, 50% emotional when it comes to thinking and processing. So at times I can get very confused as to which one is driving the driver's seat. And when I do get confused and I let my mind make the decision, I usually end up in flat on my face. So being able to sit with my emotions and for the first time, like be able to put a name to the feeling, to the whatever it is, so that I can heal from any trauma. I think people are so unwilling to go that deep. And when they don't want to go that deep, and it's just like a split decision that all you have to do is just want to sit with the uncomfortableness for just a moment. Because in 5 minutes from now, that uncomfortableness will probably go away. Because, if anything that I know about emotions and feelings is there's no truth in the now with them. Happy 1 minute, sad the next, back happy again, so if you can sit with them for just that moment to identify them, to name them, and when you name it, then I think that you're on like this new path to really full recovery to anything, drug addiction, any kind of abuse, what have you, because those things are blindly navigating our lives because we don't know what it is. And when you don't know what it is, how can you, basically it's like a doctor trying to heal something that it has no idea. Well, I think it's this, so I'm going to give you this medication, but it's like very surface level and not even touching what the actual problem is.
The root cause. Yeah. So Stephen, as you kind of described this, I mean, it's very robust series of circumstances, this comma. What have you learned, or better yet, what are you learning about yourself as a result of this whole experience?
That I am definitely meant to be like a role model and lead by example, and I think that lead by example ties in with my whole like migration and kind of like what's next. And I think that's where I'm at with my comma. It's like, okay, I've conquered this area, this challenge in my life. Now, what's my next one? What can I take on as this new challenge so that I can help bring this knowledge of wherever I'm at in my life to those around me, my community, and share with them. I put it like this, like kicking down the door so that others can walk through it. And going through basically like the pits of hell, the dark nights of the soul, to make that journey a little bit easier for other people going through it.
That's powerful. And it is, right? It strikes me as that is the human experience, right? That is what we do for each other, sometimes willingly, sometimes, unknowingly. But to hear you see that showing up in your life and then kind of consciously take ownership of that and then find meaning and purpose in it is pretty powerful.
Wow. As powerful as it is, or we think that it is, it's also very scary because it's like the idea of not that it's like a weight, but it's like you almost fear your success or whatever it is that can come from that it's like almost like I don't know what I'm the word that I'm looking for, but it's like, why me? Like, why? No, this is too big for me, I think, is what
Yeah.
I'm looking for. So you kind of limit yourself again, where it's like, well, I don't want to play big, so I'm going to play small because this seems too big for me.
Stephen, as you reflect back on the experience for you, what has changed for you, or what is changing for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
To let go of victimhood, blaming, because when you can let go of blaming, then you really stepped into the true place of unconditional love. And you step into this place of true like actualization. And when you can see, yeah, someone might have caused you hurt, but what decision did you make that allowed you to get to that point, to be in that situation that allowed someone to hurt you? What red flag did you ignore? What resistance did you push through? And when you can twist the viewpoint of how could this person do this to me, and look at it in the lens of, okay, how did I get myself in this position? And when you can look through it through that lens, you'll see things that you weren't ready to see. But it's like the moment that you see just one thing, it's like you can't unsee it, because more things start to reveal themselves to you about yourself, that it's like, whoa, it's like one after the next. And it's like, some people don't want to see that. And that's okay. That's, not my journey, not my story to tell. Everyone has their own points in life. And my job isn't to tell someone how to live their life, or how I think that they should live their life, or because I've gone through that with, people projecting that onto me. But I view myself as kind of like this light tower in the ocean guiding ships home. I'm there for those people just like passing through, just simple direction.
Or anyone who's looking for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate what you say about the whole and what got me here. And, I would even add too that there are plenty of circumstances in life that we don't have any control over. So maybe we can look at that and say, well, I didn't do anything to get me here. And yet people in those circumstances have shared stories of, even if it happened to me and it was outside of my control, then I can still self-reflect on it and ask myself, well, what did I make it mean? Right. And I know there's a lot of common wisdom out there that people will share. It's quoted in different ways, but I've heard the phrase, like, it's not what happened to you, it's what you made it mean. And so it strikes me as that's also kind of it pairs with this.
Well, speaking of control, so anxiety, for instance, everyone, they might be prescribed like Prozac or whatever for anxiety medication. Anxiety is a huge signpost of, okay, I'm anxious. I'm anxious because I'm not in control. There's something that's going on in my environment that I'm not in control of. So now I have this over sense of anxiety that's flooding my body, and I'm uncomfortable with it. So I'm just going to go pop a pill so I don't have to feel it. When it's like the moment you can actually let go of control, because in life, you can't control anything. The only thing that you can control is how you react. And when I think people can grasp that, then that is a whole new sense of freedom as well, because anytime that I feel anxious, I'm like, okay, what am I trying to control right now? Because I know that I can't control anything. So I need to stop trying to control whatever that is.
Stephen, so many things that you've shared and so many insights. My last question then is, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Hmm. Getting off the comma, it looks like being and embracing this, I'll put it this way, being able to put my words to my action, not just talking it, but walking it.
Mm.
And I think, that's what a true role model is doing what you say and saying what you mean. Um, because that's, like I said earlier, like one thing that has always bugged me about people from early on is, well, you're saying one thing, but you're doing another thing. So I can tell right now that you're someone that I can't trust. So getting off the comma is now embodying everything that I've learned and being me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I think you just answered the question, but when you describe yourself as a role model, not that it could be simplified down to just one specific thing, but what would you say well, how do I even ask the
What a
question?
role model is.
Yeah. Or what is it that you're modeling?
I'm modeling, or what I want to model is being authentically you, whoever you is.
Mm.
So showing people that it's okay to be you, it's actually I think walking against the grain when you decide to be yourself, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said earlier too, like people want to belong, but when you end up wanting to belong or thinking that you're belonging, what you end up doing is just fitting in, which isn't belonging to anyone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so role model is just embracing and living you authentically and with no one else's agenda attached to you, um, and being unattached to, I guess, agendas in general, like just living in the now and just flowing with life.
And that supports what you were saying earlier, right? Like what I'm hearing you say, tell me if I'm wrong, is that, whereas earlier you were kind of questioning this word of belonging, where you're landing is I belong to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in belonging to me and living authentically, I'm showing other people what this can look like for them.
Right. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but when I moved out to California, my whole mindset was I want to show my family that they can do whatever it is that they set their mind to, that they're not limited to the life that they think
Mm.
that they now have to have because for whatever reason, like fate was, or these are the cards that I was dealt, like, so I'm just going to suck it up and this is, my life. It's like, no, what I've learned is at any point in life, you can rewrite your book however many times you want. And I think that's the beauty, of life and these experiences. Uh, one thing that I did forget to mention is during all of this, the last few years, I actually had my car stolen with all of my
Mm.
belongings in it. And I was getting ready to actually go out on a road trip. And I remember packing my car up one night, and within less than, I would say, 12 hours, everything that I had owned was gone, just like that.
Mm.
And it was
Mm.
actually my brother who stole my car, and so that was, you know an experience of in itself, which, for a moment I was upset, bitter, angry, resentful. I felt all of those things, and then I remember thinking, I'm like, well, I came in this world with nothing. I'm going to leave with nothing. At the end of the day, these are just things. Everything's
Mm.
replaceable. Does it suck that I have to, start from scratch again? And I'm like, yeah, But then I thought, well, no, it's not, because I can start from scratch again, you know?
Hmm.
And I, when you realize that you can do that, then it's like any situation that you go through in life now becomes, this mountain that you think that you have in front of you just becomes like this little molehill, because it's like, well, I've done this before. So it's just like this whole fresh, book, experience. You can literally recreate yourself at any
Yeah.
point. And, if it wasn't for my car being stolen, I told my brother, because now we joke about this, I said, um, he made it a whole lot easier for me to make a move to get out of an unhealthy situation where these items were just holding me back, because it's like baggage that, you're just weighed to. And it's
Hmm.
like, well, now I don't have that baggage. So I'm freer to move without anything holding me back, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah. Dispossession, right?
Yeah.
Stephen, we could talk. We could truly. I love hearing your story. I love hearing the way you tell your story. We could talk for so much longer. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and land the plane. So, if people wanted to hear more about what you have shared or learn more about what you haven't shared, more of your story, how could people find you, contact you, get in touch with you? And I'll put that information in the show notes.
So the easiest way is on Instagram, which is at Discovery with Steven. So I have the link to my website there for any coaching or one-on-one support.
And that's Stephen with a PH, not a V.
Yes, yes. PH for balance.
Nice. I like that.
Mhm.
Awesome. And another thing that we do on every episode that I believe is really important to what we contribute to here is I call it acknowledgments. And it's basically a way for you to lift up, boost, or give a voice to others in your circle who might not otherwise get some of the publicity that they need, or maybe it's just somebody important that you want to acknowledge. So, as you look at your circle and it's part of your story, who would you like to acknowledge? And I'll put that information in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so the first person I would like to acknowledge is Brigitte Knight. Brigitte was actually a coach of mine at the point through all of this turmoil that went in my life. So if it wasn't for her, like, I don't think that actually, she was the first person that I ever like was openly vulnerable to for the third time.
Mm.
So Brigitte Knight, and then Lavina Archers, um, who was my mentor and is my mentor still for human design and the
Mhm.
BG5 system. So that's a great tool that really helped me understand myself quicker. Um,
Mm.
so she's at Human Design Life Coaching, and then the BG5 Business Institute for career and business consulting.
Okay. Nice. And we'll make sure to get that information in the show notes. I do know Brigitte. Obviously, she's been a guest on the podcast, and I
Well,
still work with her from time to time too because her insights are amazing. And before we actually conclude, I haven't asked you. We talked about human design a number of different times. What is your human design type?
so I am an emotional projector, and my public role or profile is a 6-2, which is a role model hermit.
Okay. And I think people have learned a little bit about what that means. And for folks who aren't familiar with human design, which I think is a lot of people, that's just enough of a teaser to say, hey, if you're interested, then go check it out. Go to
So
Brigitte Knight's
profound.
website and do the free chart, and then contact Brigitte for a reading, right? So a little plug to Brigitte. Stephen, thank you for coming here, sharing your story. It has been a pleasure getting to know you for the first time. I'm sure we are going to talk some more. And thank you for kind of putting your story out there for others to connect with. It's been a great time getting to hear some of what you shared.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me the moment to be vulnerable. I think this is actually really good practice, because when you go through trust issues and whatnot, you build up these walls, and it's the moments like these slowly help me break down that wall.
I will definitely say this, like that's one of the things that I've learned from this experience. And I think I always suspected, I always knew it would be an element of it. I think the right way to say it is that I underestimated the value. With a podcast, you always think about the listeners and what the listeners are going to get from it. And yet I get to witness each and every episode, the impact that it has on the person telling the story. So I hope that that's also a message that gets sent. It's not just, what's the wisdom we get from your story, but the value in storytelling, the value in giving people space to tell their stories, and slowing down from the society that we live in that's all about sound bites and money makers and money shots and things like that, and being able to say, let me just set myself aside for a moment and let you share your story, because there's always value that comes out of that.
Not to get biblical or anything, but there's the one verse that says the truth shall set you free. And it's when you speak your story, when you get things outside of you and you're not keeping everything bottled in, it's like speaking that out is so freeing that it's like this weight has just now shifted off of you. And I think speaking your story is really, really undervalued in this day. But I think a lot more people would be so much more healthier and happier if they did.
Well, I believe that we don't have enough examples of people unburdening themselves and sharing the story, but we have plenty of examples of what happens when you hold it in, don't we? Yeah. Stephen, thank you. And I will look forward to talking to you more off the mic. And we will look forward to having a follow-up conversation with you in a handful of months.
Thank you.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.